Peaceful Finland, that distant northern country of lakes and fjords, of sailing ships and summer bathing beaches, has been invaded and bombed. The long crisis of apparently futile negotiation with Moscow has ended in attack by overwhelming power. The reason for this? The Soviet, a nation of some 180 millions, has been threatened by the 4 millions in Finland. The huge Russian Air Force, probably the biggest in the world, fears for its very existence. And the Red Fleet no doubt has been gravely menaced by Finland's 2 or 3 warships. What are the real facts?
Good afternoon, my name is Dr. Ryan Alba. That was a 1939 British newsreel explaining why the Soviet Union felt threatened by Finland. And Finland was no threat. The Soviet Union, much like Putin's claims today about Ukraine, did claim that they were somehow in mortal danger from the much smaller country on their border. This country with a minuscule military compared to that of the Soviet Union. Finland had done nothing to menace its much larger neighbor to the east. Much like what Putin says about Ukraine, the Soviet Union said the exact same thing about Finland in 1939. Now, the Soviet army invaded Finland in December of 1939, with the purpose of toppling the government in Finland in a matter of a few days. The Soviet military went in by land, by sea, by air, with an army of nearly 100,000 troops. The Soviet military just dwarfed the military force that the Finns had to defend themselves. Much like what the Kremlin had planned for Ukraine. At the time, Stalin intended for Soviet Union to take Finland and either install his pro-Soviet puppet government or annex Finland, erase its sovereignty, and make it part of USSR. The assumption, much like today, was that it would perhaps take only a few days. It did not work that way, though. The Finns in 1939 fought them off furiously, with a population of only 4 million at the time, compared to 180 million in the Soviet Union. And, of course, proportionate military to those populations. The Finns were outnumbered, widely outgunned, but they were also resourceful. They were fighting on their home turf. And they were more motivated than you can ever imagine. They were defending their homes. They were defending their land. That war was named later the Winter War. Stalin perhaps thought his forces would be home for the New Year's celebration. But the war dragged into 1940. The Finns wore this remarkable white winter camouflage. They fought on skis and snowshoes and cut down the invading Soviet forces. Finland shot down dozens of Soviet airplanes in one famous battle in central Finland. It was 6,000 Finnish troops versus more than 20,000 Soviet troops. Now, despite being outnumbered to such a massive extent, the Soviets suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties in their invasion of Finland. The Western world was shocked, again, very much like today, as it too thought that the Soviet would have just won in a few days. Sounds familiar. The Finns put up an unexpected and incredibly effective resistance. They became a cause for celebration even all over the United States at the time. Even though our government didn't send them nearly as much practical help as they wanted. Now, a few months later, Stalin regrouped and sent another military. Not 100,000 this time, but more than 500,000 Soviet troops to get the job done. The population of Finland was less than 4 million people in the whole country, and Stalin had to send in 500,000 troops to finish the invasion. The Finns still fought hard. They were able to keep their grounds for weeks, even after the 500,000 Soviet troops arrived in the second wave of the attack. The Finns were able to hold on ultimately for more than 100 days. 100 days. In the end, the Finnish government stayed intact and they negotiated peace with the Soviets. Although the negotiated settlement was not in favor of Finland, but it was nowhere near as bad as what Stalin had intended for when he invaded in the first place. In the negotiated settlement that ended the Winter War in 1940, Finland ended up ceding about 10% of its territory to the Soviets. But they stayed as an independent nation, Finland. The Finnish people kept their sovereignty, kept their way of government, and they even got to keep their army. They got to stay who they are. But they also never forgot about it. Now, because Russia invaded Ukraine, support has spiked in Finland and Sweden for those two countries to now join NATO. They never wanted to before, but now they do. One of the million different contradictory justifications Putin has given for why he invaded Ukraine, one you often hear parroted by people in this country apologizing for Putin, is the idea that Putin felt cramped by NATO. Too many countries to the west of Russia had joined NATO. They were too close to Russian borders. Therefore, they had to invade Ukraine to ensure that Ukraine would never ever join NATO. Now, he has made this case that the reason for the war, at least one reason for this invasion, is that Putin could not stand the feeling of having any NATO countries right up against Russia's borders. Well, congratulations, Putin. Guess what you got for invading Ukraine? Even if Finland alone joins NATO, you will have just more than double the amount of Russian land bordering with NATO countries. Well done. Now, Sweden's ruling party, the Social Democrats, has always been against Sweden joining NATO, and as the Swedish public as well. But at the moment, both the public and the ruling party in Sweden have changed their minds. The Social Democratic Party put out a statement that said, and I quote, "When Russia invaded Ukraine, Sweden's security position changed fundamentally." End of quote. Now, despite having been opposed to Sweden joining NATO, the Swedish government will decide on applying for NATO membership as early as this summer. Finland might be making its request to join NATO sooner than Sweden. And NATO has already signaled, its approval for both countries to join. Interestingly, one recent poll in Finland showed that even though just a couple of years ago, I believe in 2019, if I'm correct, a majority of the Finnish public did not want their country to join NATO. But since Putin invaded Ukraine, the Finnish people are now 68% in favor of joining NATO. 68%. It gets even better. The number spikes to 77% in favor of joining NATO if the Finnish government studies the issue and recommends it. And guess what? The Finnish government will present a security review on this issue to their parliament probably next week. A recent survey of the members of the Finnish parliament says that 194 out of the 200 members of their parliament are now in favor of Finland joining NATO. This means that Finnish government will recommend that they would join NATO, and the Finnish public will support them along the way. The former Prime Minister of Finland told the AFP this week that it is a foregone conclusion that Finland will request NATO membership. And the request will happen within the next few weeks. It will happen most likely in time for the next NATO summit in June. Russia has responded as usual, being the bully, by threatening that there will be consequences, including military actions if the two nations join NATO. But these are not just any two countries, in particular Finland. Finland has been preparing for those kinds of threats from Russia since the Winter War in 1940. Russia now is threatening implicitly that they might do it again. But Finland is remarkably ready for those threats. The country maintains a secure stockpile of at least a 6-month supply of all major food grains, things like oats and wheat. They also retain a 6-month reserve of all primary fuel supply. It gets even better. They require all pharmaceutical companies in Finland to keep a secure stockpile of several months' worth of all major imported drugs. Every building above a particular size in Finland is required to have a bomb shelter. That is on top of a national plan that repurposes underground parking garages and ice rinks and pools into civilian shelters in the event of an invasion. In the country's capital, Helsinki, they have built 10 million square meters of underground space underneath Helsinki proper. It is not only shelters and subway station, it is an art museum, a church, a cosmic swimming complex, a mall, and they even have a go-karting track in addition to a colossal drinking water reservoir. All underground, all beneath the capital city of Helsinki, and all for safety. One former defense minister in Finland told the Financial Times last week, and I quote, how detailed planning is in place for how to handle the invasion, including the deployment of fighter jets to remote roads around the country, the laying of mines and key shipping lanes, and preparation of land defenses such as blowing up bridges. He further said all armed forces headquarters are located in hillside under 30 to 40 meters of granite. End of quote. Talk about being ready. They are ready. Everyone is ready. And Russia continues to bully and continues to give ultimatums. Someone has to stand up and put Russia back in its place. If not NATO, then who?